History remembers the winners. We know the names: Alexander, Caesar, Genghis Khan. Their victories carved into monuments, printed in textbooks, turned into Hollywood blockbusters. But here is what bothers me. What about the soldiers who actually made those victories happen? The men who stood in the shield wall, the warriors who charged first into the breach, the elite units so terrifying that their presence alone could end a battle before it began. I have spent weeks researching 8 of them. 8 military units that dominated their eras, that made empires tremble, and then vanished. Some were massacred, some were disbanded, some just faded away. But they all have one thing in common. They were the best fighters their civilizations ever produced. And now they exist only in history books and archaeological digs. I am Arthur Scott, and today we are doing something different. This is not a case file. This is a list. 8 elite military units that terrified the world before disappearing from history. No conspiracy theories, no wild speculation, just documented evidence and the stories the evidence tells. Let us begin. Greece, 4th century before the Common Era. Now, Thebes was not the most famous Greek city. That honor belongs to Athens or Sparta, depending on who you ask. But for about 40 years in the middle of the 4th century, Thebes dominated Greece. And the reason for that dominance was 300 men. Just 300. The Sacred Band of Thebes. And here is where it gets interesting. Maybe uncomfortable for some people, but I am going to tell you anyway because it is documented history. The Sacred Band was composed entirely of male couples. 150 pairs of lovers, fighting side by side. This was not a secret, not a rumor invented later. The ancient sources are explicit. Plutarch, writing several centuries after but drawing on earlier accounts, explains why this worked. Men fighting alongside their beloved would never show cowardice, would never abandon their partner. Shame before a lover was considered the most powerful motivator imaginable. Think about that for a moment. The unit was founded around 378 BCE by a Theban general named Gorgidas. Initially, these warriors were distributed throughout the army to strengthen morale everywhere. But a later commander named Epaminondas had a different idea. He concentrated them into a single shock unit. That changed everything. 371 BCE, the Battle of Leuctra. Sparta had dominated Greece for generations. Their army was considered unbeatable. Everyone knew this. And here was Thebes, a second-rate power at best, facing them in open battle. Epaminondas did something nobody expected. Instead of the traditional Greek formation with the strongest troops on the right wing, he stacked his left wing 50 shields deep. And at the tip of that formation, the Sacred Band. They hit the Spartan right like a hammer striking glass. The Spartan king Cleombrotus died in the fighting. 400 Spartans fell, an almost unimaginable number for a single battle. Spartan military dominance, which had lasted more than a century, ended that afternoon. For the next decade, Thebes was the dominant power in Greece. The Sacred Band had never lost a battle. Never. And then came Philip. Philip II of Macedon was building something new. A professional army that would eventually conquer everything under his son Alexander. But first he needed to deal with the Greek city-states that stood in his way. 338 BCE. The Battle of Chaeronea. The Greeks were fighting for their independence. The Sacred Band was positioned on the Theban wing as always. What happened next? Well, the details are disputed by historians, but the result is not. The Greek line broke. Most of the army fled or surrendered. The Sacred Band did neither. And this is where we move from ancient texts to physical evidence. At the battlefield of Chaeronea, there stands a monument. A massive stone lion about 20 feet tall sitting on a pedestal. Ancient sources say it marks where the Sacred Band fell. In 1818, archaeologists excavated beneath that lion. They found 254 skeletons, arranged in 7 rows. The bones showed combat wounds, sword cuts, spear thrusts. And here is the detail that still moves me every time I think about it. The bodies were not dumped carelessly. They were laid out carefully, respectfully, in pairs. 300 warriors went into that battle. 254 bodies in that grave. They did not retreat. They did not surrender. They died exactly where they stood. According to Plutarch, when Philip surveyed the battlefield and saw the fallen Sacred Band, he wept. He reportedly said, "Perish any man who suspects that these men either did or suffered anything unseemly." The Lion of Chaeronea still stands. You can visit it, about an hour and a half from Athens. Beneath it lie the remains of 300 men who loved each other, fought together, and refused to live without each other. They vanished in a single afternoon, but they were never forgotten. All right, this one is different, because with the Sacred Band we know what happened. We have the battlefield. We have the graves. The story has an ending. The 9th Legion does not have an ending. It has a disappearance. Legio Nona Hispana, the 9th Legion. Originally raised in Spain, one of the oldest and most distinguished units in the entire Roman military machine, this legion had been around for centuries. It fought for Julius Caesar in Gaul. It helped conquer Britain in 43 of the Common Era. It was stationed in the north of Britain at a fortress called Eboracum, modern York, for decades. And then, sometime after 120 CE, it vanishes from the historical record. Gone. No mention, no records, no explanation. For centuries, this was one of the great Roman mysteries. An entire legion, 5,000 men plus auxiliaries, simply disappeared? How does that happen? The mystery became famous in the 20th century through a novel called The Eagle of the Ninth by Rosemary Sutcliffe. The book imagines the legion marching north into Scotland and being massacred by the Picts. Hollywood made a movie about it. Great story. But is it true? Probably not. Here is what we actually know. In 2015, archaeologists working in the Netherlands found a tile stamp with the mark of the 9th Legion at a site called Nijmegen. The dating suggests the legion, or at least part of it, was in the Netherlands around 120 to 130 CE, after it supposedly vanished in Britain. Other records suggest elements of the 9th may have been transferred to the eastern frontier, possibly during the reign of Hadrian. There is a fragmentary inscription from the eastern provinces that might reference officers from the 9th Legion. Might. That word is doing a lot of work there. So what actually happened? Honestly, we do not know. But the massacred in Scotland story is almost certainly wrong. The more likely explanations are less dramatic. The legion might have been disbanded after suffering heavy losses in the Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea. It might have been merged with other units. Administrative records from this period are incomplete. Gaps happen. The timing is interesting though. Hadrian's Wall was built starting around 122 CE, right when the 9th Legion disappears from British records. Some historians speculate that the legion suffered significant losses in a rebellion that prompted Hadrian to build the wall in the first place, and then was quietly disbanded or reassigned. Here is the uncomfortable truth about history. Roman legions disappearing from records is not actually that unusual. Record keeping was imperfect. Units got reorganized, renamed, consolidated. The 9th Legion might have died gloriously in battle, or it might have been broken up for boring bureaucratic reasons. But the mystery version makes a better story, and sometimes that is what survives. Not the truth, but the version we want to believe. The 9th Legion's last confirmed location was York. If you visit today, you can still see Roman ruins. Somewhere beneath that modern English city are the foundations of the fortress where 5,000 legionaries lived and trained. Where they went after that, we genuinely do not know. Constantinople, the greatest city in the medieval world. For 1,000 years, this was the center of civilization. Or at least, that is what the Romans thought. After the Western Empire fell, the Eastern Roman Empire kept going. We call it Byzantium now. Constantinople was its heart, a city of 500,000 people when London had maybe 15,000. And protecting the Byzantine emperor was a unit unlike anything else in the ancient world. The Varangian Guard. Here is what makes them fascinating. These were not Romans. They were not even Greeks. They were Vikings. Starting in the late 9th century, Norse warriors began traveling down the rivers of Russia to Constantinople. Some came to raid, some came to trade, and some came to fight for whoever would pay them. Around 988 CE, the Byzantine Emperor Basil II formalized this arrangement. He created an elite bodyguard unit composed entirely of foreigners, primarily Scandinavians. The Varangian Guard. Now, why would an emperor want foreign bodyguards? The answer is simple: loyalty. Byzantine politics was, let me just say, complicated. Emperors were constantly being assassinated, overthrown, blinded by rivals. Often the conspirators were members of the local aristocracy, people with connections to the regular army, people with ambitions. Foreign mercenaries had no local ties, no family politics, no reason to join a conspiracy. Their only loyalty was to whoever paid them. And the emperor paid very well. The Varangians were famous for two things: their enormous two-handed axes and their ferocious loyalty. These were not ceremonial guards standing around looking impressive. They fought in real battles, often as the emperor's last reserve. When everything else was failing, you sent in the Varangians. They were shock troops, the unit you deployed when you absolutely needed the line to hold. The most famous Varangian was a Norwegian prince named Harald Sigurdsson, later known as Harald Hardrada. He served in the Varangian Guard for about a decade, fighting in dozens of battles across the Mediterranean, Sicily, Bulgaria, the Holy Land. He came to Constantinople with nothing. He left with enough gold to finance a claim to the Norwegian throne. And here is where it gets interesting. Harald later became King of Norway and died in 1066, trying to conquer England. At the Battle of Stamford Bridge, just weeks before William the Conqueror arrived. Think about that. A Viking prince who served as a Byzantine emperor's bodyguard came within a few weeks of becoming King of England. History is genuinely stranger than fiction. The Varangian Guard evolved over time. As Scandinavia converted to Christianity and centralized, fewer Norse warriors made the journey to Constantinople. By the 12th century, the Guard was increasingly composed of Anglo-Saxons, English warriors who had fled after the Norman conquest. England's loss became Byzantium's gain. And then came 1204, the Fourth Crusade. A Christian army that was supposed to fight Muslims in the Holy Land instead attacked Constantinople. The city was sacked. The Byzantine Empire fragmented. What happened to the Varangian Guard during the siege is not entirely clear. Some sources say they fought to the last, defending the walls. Others suggest many had already left or been disbanded due to the empire's financial collapse. The empire was eventually restored in 1261. There are references to Varangian units afterward, but they were shadows of what they had been. The tradition lingered for another 2 centuries, gradually fading. When Constantinople finally fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, the Varangian Guard, if any remnant still existed, fell with it. But they left traces. In the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral of Constantinople, now a mosque, you can still see runic graffiti scratched into the marble railings, Viking letters carved by bored Varangian guardsmen during long ceremonies 1,000 years ago. One inscription simply says, Halfdan carved these runes. Halfdan, a young man from Scandinavia, standing guard in the greatest church in Christendom, scratching his name into the marble because he was bored. That is history. Not the grand narratives, the small human moments. Before we continue, let me show you something disturbing. Let me ask you something. Do you know where the word assassin comes from? It comes from a medieval Islamic sect called the Hashashin, and their story is one of the strangest in all of military history. Around 1090 CE, a man named Hassan-i-Sabah seized a fortress called Alamut in the mountains of northern Persia. The fortress was nearly impregnable, perched on a rock so steep that it could only be approached by a single narrow path. From this mountain stronghold, Hassan built something unprecedented, a state based on targeted assassination. Now I need to be careful here. The assassins have been mythologized so heavily that separating fact from legend is genuinely difficult. The stories told about them, that they used hashish to induce visions of paradise, that their killers were brainwashed fanatics who did not fear death. These come mostly from hostile sources: crusaders who fought them, rival Muslim dynasties who feared them. Modern historians, including scholars from the Ismaili Muslim tradition itself, paint a more nuanced picture. The Hashashin were Nizari Ismailis, a branch of Shia Islam. They were religious dissidents in a Sunni-dominated world, using unconventional tactics because they could not match their enemies in conventional warfare. Their method was simple but psychologically devastating. Instead of fighting armies, they targeted leaders: a sultan, a vizier, a general. If you opposed the Nizari state, you might wake up one morning with an assassin's dagger on your pillow. A warning. Next time it would be in your chest. The killers were called fidai, those who sacrificed themselves. They would spend months or even years infiltrating a target's household, gaining trust, waiting for the perfect moment, and they almost never tried to escape afterward. The killing was usually public, dramatic, designed to send a message. At their peak, the Nizari Ismailis controlled a network of fortresses across Persia and Syria. They were never a conventional power, but their reputation made them disproportionately influential. Sultans negotiated with them. Crusaders hired them. Everyone feared them. And then the Mongols came. In 1256, the Mongol general Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, invaded Persia. He had a list of targets. The assassins were on it. One by one, the mountain fortresses fell. The Mongols were patient and thorough. They had no fear of assassination. Try intimidating an army of 200,000, and they showed no mercy. Alamut, the original fortress, surrendered in 1256. The Mongols destroyed it. And here is the real tragedy. They burned the library. Centuries of Nizari writings, philosophy, history, records, gone forever. This is the tragedy of the assassins. Almost everything we know about them comes from people who hated them. Their own voice, their own history, their own perspective. Most of it was destroyed in that fire. The Nizari Ismaili tradition survived, though. Today, there are an estimated 15 million Nizari Ismailis worldwide, led by the Aga Khan. It is a peaceful, moderate community known for philanthropy and education. But the assassins as a military power? They ended at Alamut. A 200-year experiment in asymmetric warfare, erased by the most symmetric force in history. Of course, they live on in other ways. That video game franchise Assassin's Creed has made billions of dollars off a heavily fictionalized version of this story, which is ironic when you think about it. The historical assassins were trying to resist overwhelming power through unconventional means. Now they have been turned into a product of the entertainment industrial complex. I am not sure Hassani Sabah would appreciate that. Alright, I hesitated to include this one, because the Knights Templar have been so thoroughly mythologized that discussing them means wading through layers of conspiracy theories, Dan Brown novels, YouTube nonsense. But they were real. They were one of the most powerful military organizations in medieval history, and their end was genuinely dramatic. So let us stick to what we actually know. 1099. The First Crusade captures Jerusalem. Christian kingdoms are established in the Holy Land. Pilgrims start arriving from Europe to visit the holy sites. Problem: the roads are dangerous. Bandits prey on travelers. The new Crusader states do not have enough soldiers to protect everyone. Around 1119, a French knight named Hugh de Payens and a small group of companions approach the King of Jerusalem with a proposal. They will take religious vows, poverty, chastity, obedience, and dedicate themselves to protecting pilgrims. The king gives them quarters on the Temple Mount, in what was believed to be the ruins of Solomon's temple. Hence the name. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, the Knights Templar. What happened next was extraordinary. The Templars got papal endorsement. They were exempted from local laws and taxes. They answered only to the Pope. Donations poured in from across Europe. Land, money, privileges. Within decades, they had become one of the wealthiest organizations in Christendom. They owned thousands of properties across Europe. They pioneered early banking. Pilgrims could deposit money in London and withdraw it in Jerusalem, avoiding the risks of carrying cash across dangerous territory. And they were formidable warriors. Templar knights were not allowed to retreat unless the odds were worse than 3-1. Their discipline was legendary. Muslim commanders learned to fear the white mantles with the red cross. But here is the thing people forget. The Templars' job was to protect the Holy Land. And the Holy Land was lost. 1291. The city of Acre, the last major Crusader stronghold, fell to the Mamluks. The Templars fought to the end. Their last Grand Master, William of Beaujeu, died in the final battle. The surviving Templars retreated to Cyprus, then back to their European properties. But they had a problem. Their purpose was gone. They still had enormous wealth. They still had military capabilities. But what were they for? Protecting pilgrims to a holy land that Christians no longer controlled. Enter Philip IV of France. Philip was in debt. Badly. He owed money to the Templars, among others. And the Templars had something he wanted: their wealth, their land, their banking network. On Friday, October 13th, 1307. Yes, this is where the Friday the 13th is unlucky superstition comes from. Philip's agents arrested virtually every Templar in France simultaneously. The charges were sensational: heresy, idol worship, spitting on the cross, homosexual acts, worshipping a mysterious head called Baphomet. Were any of these charges true? Almost certainly not. The confessions were extracted under torture. Many Templars later recanted. The charges were suspiciously similar to accusations Philip had made against other groups he wanted to destroy. Modern historians generally view the whole affair as a frame-up, a politically motivated attack on a wealthy organization that had outlived its usefulness. Pope Clement V, under pressure from Philip, dissolved the Templar Order in 1312. Their properties were transferred to other organizations, primarily the Knights Hospitaller, though Philip managed to seize much of it for himself. 1314. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, was burned at the stake in Paris for relapsing into heresy after retracting his confession. Legend says that as the flames rose, de Molay cursed Philip and the Pope, summoning them to meet him before God within a year. Pope Clement died within a month. Philip died within a year. Probably coincidence. Possibly dramatic embellishment added later. But a good story. And then the conspiracy theories started. The Templars survived in secret. They fled to Scotland. They founded the Freemasons. They guard the Holy Grail. They secretly rule the world. None of that is supported by evidence. The Templar Order was dissolved. Its members were absorbed into other orders, returned to secular life, or died in prison. There is no credible evidence of a secret continuation. What did survive was their influence. Their banking innovations shaped European finance. Their military model inspired later orders. Their dramatic downfall became a template for how powerful institutions can be destroyed by determined enemies. Jacques de Molay died on an island in the Seine in the shadow of Notre Dame. Today, there is a small plaque marking the spot. The man who commanded one of the most powerful military organizations in history, burned as a heretic on the orders of a king who owed him money. That is the real Templar story. No Holy Grail required. Let me show you what happens when an elite guard becomes too powerful. The Praetorian Guard, Rome's imperial bodyguard. For 300 years, they were the most politically important soldiers in the Western world. Augustus, the first Roman emperor, formalized the Praetorian Guard around 27 BCE. They were elite troops, better paid than regular legionaries, stationed in Rome itself. Their job was simple: protect the emperor. But that job came with a problem. If you are the only armed force in the capital, you do not just protect the emperor, you decide who becomes emperor. 41 CE. The Emperor Caligula is murdered by officers of the Praetorian Guard. They did not like how he treated them. His uncle Claudius is found hiding behind a curtain. The Praetorians declare him emperor on the spot. Claudius understood the message. He paid the guard a massive bonus for their loyalty. This set a precedent. Want to be emperor? Pay the Praetorians. In 69 CE, the year of the four emperors, the guard switched sides multiple times, selling their allegiance to whoever offered the best price. But the most absurd moment came in 193 CE. After assassinating the Emperor Pertinax, the Praetorians literally auctioned off the throne. A wealthy senator named Didius Julianus won the bidding. He lasted 66 days before being killed by the next claimant. The new emperor Septimius Severus disbanded the old Praetorian Guard and replaced them with his own loyal troops. But the institution continued. Different emperors reformed it, purged it, tried to control it. It never quite worked. The Praetorians remained powerful, dangerous, frequently treacherous, until Constantine. 312 CE. Constantine is fighting a civil war against Maxentius, who holds Rome. The Praetorian Guard fights for Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. Constantine wins. Maxentius drowns in the Tiber, and Constantine makes a decision. He disbands the Praetorian Guard entirely. Their barracks are demolished. The institution is abolished. 300 years of history ended by imperial decree. The Praetorians did not vanish in battle or disappear mysteriously. They were deliberately destroyed by an emperor who had learned history's lesson. Never give too much power to the people with the swords. This next one will divide people. Let us go to Istanbul. 600 years ago. In villages across the Balkans, Ottoman officials are conducting a collection. They are taking boys. Christian boys, usually between 8 and 15 years old. The healthiest, the strongest, the most intelligent. This is the Devshirme, the collection. And it might be the most controversial military recruitment system in history. The boys are converted to Islam, given new names, educated, trained, evaluated. The smartest become administrators. The strongest become soldiers. The soldiers become Janissaries. How do you evaluate this? By modern standards, the Devshirme was monstrous. Children torn from their families, forcibly converted, raised as slaves of the state. But in the context of the 15th century, it was also a path to power. Janissaries could rise to the highest positions in the empire: grand viziers, provincial governors, admirals. Many were former Janissaries. For a peasant boy in the Balkans, being collected might mean a better life than he would have had otherwise. I am not defending it. I am saying history is complicated. Militarily, the Janissaries were revolutionary. They were one of the first standing armies in the post-Roman world. They were early adopters of firearms, disciplined infantry who could deliver devastating musket volleys. When the Ottomans finally conquered Constantinople in 1453, Janissaries were at the forefront. They were the shock troops that breached the walls. For the next 2 centuries, the Ottoman Empire expanded relentlessly. The Janissaries were the elite core of its army. But like the Praetorians, they got too powerful. By the 17th century, the Janissaries had become a hereditary caste. The Devshirme was abandoned. Janissaries married, had children, passed their positions to their sons. They demanded privileges, staged mutinies, overthrew sultans who displeased them, and their military effectiveness collapsed. They resisted modernization, refused to adopt new tactics. By the early 19th century, Ottoman armies were being humiliated by European forces using technology the Janissaries rejected. Sultan Mahmud II decided to solve the problem permanently. June 15th, 1826. Mahmud announces the creation of a new modern army. The Janissaries revolt, as expected. But Mahmud is ready. Loyal troops surround the Janissary barracks. Artillery is positioned. When the Janissaries refuse to surrender, the cannons open fire. The bombardment killed thousands. The survivors were hunted through the streets. Estimates of the death toll range from 6,000 to 30,000. It is called the auspicious incident in Turkish historiography, a euphemism for a massacre. The Janissary Corps was abolished. 500 years of history ended in a single, bloody night. The modern Turkish military traces its origins to the new army Mahmud created to replace them. The Janissaries themselves? They exist only in history books now. Last one. And for this, we go back to the man who conquered more territory than anyone else in human history. Temujin, better known as Genghis Khan. The Mongol army was terrifying. Fast, disciplined, brutal. They conquered China, Persia, Russia. They would have taken Europe if their Khan had not died at the wrong moment. But even within this army of conquest, there was an elite. A unit closer to Genghis than any other. The Keshig. The Keshig were the Khan's personal guard. At their peak, they numbered about 10,000 men, which might seem like a lot for bodyguards, but consider the scale of the Mongol Empire. They were more than just guards. They were administrators, messengers, hostages. The sons of Mongol nobility served in the Keshig as a form of political insurance. Their families would not rebel if their heirs were at the Khan's court. The Keshig operated in shifts: day guard, night guard, quiver bearers. They surrounded the Khan at all times. Anyone who approached without permission was killed on the spot. Genghis Khan survived multiple assassination attempts before unifying the Mongols. He was paranoid about security. Justifiably so. The Keshig were his answer. The loyalty was real. Keshig members were promoted to command armies, govern provinces, lead conquests. They were the Khan's most trusted men, and they were rewarded accordingly. But empires do not last. After Genghis Khan died in 1227, the empire was divided among his sons and grandsons. Each fragment had its own Keshig, its own army, its own ambitions. Within a generation, Mongols were fighting Mongols. The empire that had conquered the world could not hold itself together. The original Keshig, the unit that served Genghis himself, it fragmented along with the empire. Each successor state had its own version, but none had the same unity of purpose. In China, the Yuan dynasty maintained a Keshig until the Mongols were expelled in 1368. In Persia, the Ilkhanate's Keshig converted to Islam and gradually merged with the local military elite. In Russia, the Golden Horde's Keshig persisted for another 2 centuries before dissolving along with the Khanate itself. Today, Genghis Khan is the national hero of Mongolia. His image is everywhere. His legacy is celebrated. But the Keshig, the men who stood beside him, protected him, helped him conquer the world. They are footnotes now, names in chronicles that most people have never read. 10,000 men, at the center of the largest empire in history. And like everything else, they are gone. 8 units, 8 stories. The Sacred Band of Thebes, 300 lovers who died together. The 9th Legion, 5,000 men who walked into the fog of history. The Varangian Guard, Vikings protecting Byzantine emperors. The Assassins, a mountain fortress and a library of ashes. The Knights Templar, destroyed by a king who owed them money. The Praetorian Guard, disbanded for being too good at their job. The Janissaries, massacred for refusing to change. The Mongol Keshig, scattered when the empire they protected fell apart. Different eras, different cultures, different reasons for vanishing. But they have something in common. They were the best, the elite, the warriors everyone else feared. And none of that mattered in the end. Empires fall, institutions are dissolved, loyalties shift, the world moves on. We find their bones in mass graves. their graffiti on cathedral walls, their equipment in museum cases, and we read about them in chronicles written by people who feared them, or hated them, or barely understood them. Here is what I take from this. Power is temporary. Even the mightiest warriors can be wiped out in an afternoon, or disbanded by decree, or simply forgotten. But they existed. They mattered. They shaped history. The Sacred Band held the line at Leuctra. The Varangians defended Constantinople for 5 centuries. The Assassins made sultans afraid to sleep. The Keshig rode at Genghis Khan's side when he conquered the world. They are gone now. But for a moment, a century, a few generations, sometimes just a single battle, they were the most dangerous people on Earth. If you think one of these units deserved its own deep case file, tell me which one. I am Arthur Scott. This has been 8 elite military units that vanished from history, and they are still out there somewhere. In the ground, in the records, in the ruins, waiting for someone to remember.